All right, welcome back. So if you're like me, you've probably had enough here. If you're not in Canada, you may not realize what all the buzz is about, but in Canada, cannabis just became legalized back on October 17th. If you haven't heard about it or seen it, then I'm not sure which rock you were living under. But this is one of the areas that I don't partake, but because of the industry that I'm in, it's very important industry, very important information to at least know about, and hopefully share with you guys and gals, and make sure that you know what's going on in the workplace, because it will affect you, because you're in a safety sensitive position. So if I attended the driver check event, they invited me out to cover the event. So you've probably seen a promo video. If you're following us on YouTube, you've already seen a video about this. There was some great speakers. They had all kinds here. I'm going to just share some of the ones on day one here. Were Connor Page with Driver Check, Barbara Butler, who is she's got her own consulting agency, Peter Bartz, who's in charge of the Toronto Transportation Commission, Jason Fleming with Med Relief, that was a cannabis workplace business. I'll leave it at that. Dr. Melissa Snyder Adler, who is the Chief Medical Review Officer with Driver Check, did a presentation. Then they had a panel discussion with everybody who handled that. And on day two, this was a 2-day conference. On day two, they had Trish Tutton, who is a meditation and yoga speaker. She talked about mindfulness. Dr. Jonathan Davids, who's a corporate medical director with Driver Check, he spoke. Andrea Morley was from Healthy Trucker. She was doing a little presentation on keeping the body in good working condition. Dr. Iris Greenwald is a medical review officer with Driver Check. She talked about opioid use and in the workplace. They did a giant group photo, which was a lot of fun. And then they had Drew Souza and Amy Connell of the Ontario Occupational Health Nurses Association did a presentation on what occupational health nurses are doing to work with cannabis in the workplace. And then they had Paul Redkowski. He did a whole presentation on mental health, the addictions, and those kind of things. Then they had another panel discussion moderated by Paul Gardner. So Jeremy Thiel is the marketing manager for Driver Check. He was the MC for the whole event, did a great job. And so if you look at the video, you can see a recap on the whole event. It was a 2-day event. It was what they called their summit. It was held in Milton, Ontario, and it was for everybody to get ready for this. They were talking a lot about policy. So the 2 days, the first day was really focused on cannabis in the workplace. The second day was more of an all-around, view of what's going on and how to keep your employees healthy. So both days were really important. Some really good information there. They had Shelley Uvenel Hesh was there with her Miss Destiny Star Truck, was on display. Bob Schulteis was there with the Driver Check race car. We're going to be talking with them in separate episodes, but they were both on hand to give people a bit more of an eye in the transportation industry. Most of the people in that room, I think, were part of the transportation industry, but there was a lot that were not, I'm sure, and maybe just Driver Check customers or Driver Check people who use Driver Check and just wanted more information. So overall, it was a really good couple days. But I really was looking for information for you guys as a driver. A lot of this was focused towards the management, so what they were going to do. So, but the one that really stuck out the most, and there's a couple episodes we're going to have here over the next week or so, just to kind of get the drug thing out of the way so we can move on to some other episodes. But there's been a lot of talk and stuff about the drugs and alcohol and cannabis in the workplace. But Connor Page, who's with Driver Check, really impressed me. He did a really good presentation. It wasn't more about his speaking, but the information I think was really important to drivers. And because he was talking about what is an impairment, how are they going to test for impairment, and that kind of thing. And I think that was really interesting. So he was one of the first presentations up of the day. And I didn't get a chance to get an interview with him. I tried to connect with Connor, but he was racing around this thing. Just the presentation was just one of his jobs. He had a lot going on that day, so I didn't. But I do have some snippets of his presentation, which I'm going to play in and out here. But let's just start with what is impairment. And I thought he did a really good job of showing that impairment a lot of times is perception, and this is really going to affect you as a driver. Right now, if you go to let's say you go through a traffic stop of whatever kind, it could be a ride check or it could be the scale, whatever, and you go in there and the officer feels you're impaired, that's the kind of the first mark. And it's for alcohol, it's fairly, if you've had a few too many, it's fairly noticeable, whether it's through smell, how your eyes look, how you're acting, and then they might go on to stage 2, which would be the whole walk the line, all that kind of stuff. But he was talking that impairment for alcohol, because it's fairly recent, it's a little easier and it's a little harder with cannabis. So in this section here, Connor Page is talking about impairment and how it's going to be perceived as legalization comes in. So let's join it.
To 1 ratio. Why is that important? Well, by measuring it, we can identify impacts on the brain. And alcohol has been legal for long enough that we really, really understand the impacts of impairment from alcohol. The problem with cannabis is you can't get a study approved at the level of THC that people are using on the street. Whereas alcohol, been legal, fill your boots, and we're going to study it. The other nice thing about this is it makes legal standards easier to defend. An impairment charge for alcohol has a far greater chance of being successful than does an impairment charge for drugs. So, again, I'm talking about alcohol here because I find it instructive for how we think of drugs and how we think of how these drugs are going to be tested from an impairment perspective. So, how do police test for alcohol impairment? If they suspect that you've been drinking, they have the right to request a breath sample or to do standard field sobriety test. I'm not even sure if this is what they do. This is what I think of. If you fail either of those, you're arrested and you're going back to the station. The significance of being arrested is you can't contact your legal counsel in between giving the initial breath sample and going back to the station. So what happens back at the station? They do 2 more breath tests with a qualified breath alcohol technician. And it's the results of those final breath tests that are what's stated on your record. Kind of sounds like confirmation testing, doesn't it? Which is what we do in the workplace. The screen, wait 15 minutes, confirm. And the results. So I kind of actually find this interesting. I was a little surprised by this. And you'll see in a second what I'm talking about. But there are 2 different charges here. There's a per se charge, which is separate and distinct from an impairment charge. Okay? I kind of just thought you blew over, you get an impairment charge. That's it. That's not the case. So, if you blow over 0.08, there's a charge for that. It's a criminal charge. It's a per se charge. If you're between 0.05 and 0.08, we're talking sanctions that vary from province to province. But, in order to get an impairment charge, That is completely reliant, not completely, but it is reliant on the observations of the officer who made the arrest. So you can get charged for blowing, say, .2, significant, but in theory not be charged for impairment. They are two separate charges. And that's important information to know as we consider what is going on with cannabis. That really surprised me, actually. So, impairment from cannabis. What do we know about it? First off, not a ton. As I told you, we cannot get studies approved for an illegal substance that at the THC levels that we're seeing out on the street. The study with the highest THC level I have seen is 13%. Most of them are 7, 8, somewhere down to 3%. 3%, that's your grandma's weed. Today, the average is 18%. But you can get 20, 25, you can get 30, you can get 40. You can get some crazy stuff with it, you can get 90%. Nuts. It's a completely different drug.